Settle in. Get comfortable. Sometimes the worst decisions make the best love stories. And sometimes a dare is just the universe running out of patience. Chapter 1. The Blown Kiss. The Harvest Review was the single most boring event in the kingdom's calendar, and Florence Browning had been standing in line for 47 minutes. She knew it was 47 minutes because she'd been counting. Florence counted things. She counted horseshoe nails and feed bags, and the number of strides between the forge and stall 6, and the exact degrees of angle on a corrective shoe for a horse with a short toe. She counted because counting was useful, and because her mind didn't know how to sit still, and because standing in a line of stable staff while the Alpha King of the 9 territories walked slowly past each department asking questions about grain expenditure was not an activity that required her brain, so her brain had wandered off to do inventory. 47 minutes. 216 people ahead of her. She was last in the stable line because she was the most junior farrier, which meant she'd been standing in the autumn sun in her cleanest work shirt, which was not very clean, watching the king move through the ranks like a man auditing his own kingdom one handshake at a time. He was tall, she'd give him that. And he moved like something that had been engineered for efficiency. No wasted motion, no unnecessary gestures. Just a man in a dark tunic with an iron clasp at his collar, walking a line with the specific, measured precision of someone who had been doing this since he could walk. His face was the composed kind. The kind that gave you exactly what it intended to give you, and nothing else. Steel gray eyes, dark hair cut close, a jaw that looked like it had been set in stone at birth and had never once relaxed. Blow him a kiss. Genevieve did not look at her. No, I dare you. We are not 12. We are 23 and 24, and we've been standing here for 47 minutes, and he is going to ask you about hoof rasps, and you are going to have to say something intelligent about hoof rasps while looking at that jaw, and I want to see what happens. What happens is I get reassigned to the southern outpost. What happens is he does the thing where his face doesn't move, but his eyes do something, and you'll have a story for the rest of your life. Genevieve leaned closer. Double dare. Do it, Chelsea said. Chelsea was like that. Smug about everything, certain about everything, and completely, pathologically incapable of seeing any situation as anything other than one they were winning. If Florence tripped on the stairs, Chelsea called it a tactical repositioning. If she burned dinner, Chelsea declared it a bold culinary statement. If she was about to humiliate herself in front of the most powerful man in 9 territories, Chelsea was already composing the victory narrative. It'll be funny, Chelsea added. We'll tell this story at dinner. We'll tell it at every dinner. This is a legacy moment. This is a career-ending moment. Same thing. Do it. The king was 3 people away. 2. 1. He was talking to Derek, the head groom, about the new foaling schedule. Derek was answering with the earnest enthusiasm of a man whose entire life was horses, and who had been waiting all year for someone powerful enough to care about foaling schedules. The king was listening. Actually listening, not the performative kind. The kind where his questions tracked Derek's answers and built on them, and Florence thought, against her will, that was a sign of a specific kind of intelligence that she respected, and that made this worse. He moved to her. He stopped. Steel gray eyes, level, composed. The face that held rooms. Farrier? He said. Junior farrier, Your Majesty. How long have you been with the stables? 14 months. And before that? Apprenticeship in Thornvale, 3 years. He nodded. His eyes moved briefly to her hands, the calluses, the faint burn scars from the forge, the permanent darkness under her nails that no amount of scrubbing would fix. He looked at her hands the way a man looks at evidence. Corrective shoeing experience? extensively, specializing in navicular correction and quarter cracks. Something moved behind his eyes. Not a smile, nothing that generous. A registration. The look of a man who had just filed a piece of information in a place where he intended to find it again. He was about to move on. Genevieve's elbow hit her ribs. Chelsea said, "Now!" with the absolute conviction of a wolf who had never been wrong about anything in her life and was not about to start. Florence raised her hand. She pressed her fingers to her lips. She blew a kiss at the Alpha King of the 9 territories from 4 feet away in front of the entire stable department and half the kitchen staff and 2 council members and a delegation from Thornfeld. Time stopped. His hand came up. He caught it. Not reaching, arriving. His fingers closed around the air where the kiss would have been, and his fist came to rest against his chest, over his heart, and he held it there for exactly 2 seconds, while his steel-gray eyes stayed on hers, and something happened to his face that was not a smile, but was the closest thing to one she had ever seen on a man who looked like he'd been built to never smile again. Then he moved on. But in the half-second before he turned, something reached him. A scent, hay and iron, which was the stable line, which was normal. But under it, something sharp and bright and new, like wildflower crushed between warm fingers. And it hit him at the base of the skull the way scent hits wolves, which is to say, completely and without permission. He turned his head a fraction. She was standing in the sun with her face on fire and her body very still. Not the stillness of a woman who was embarrassed, but the stillness of something that had just recognized something. The kind of still that wasn't quite human. Her hazel eyes had a ring of bright green at the edges that hadn't been there 30 seconds ago. He saw it. She didn't know he saw it. He moved on. Florence stood in the sun with her wolf purring, with a satisfaction so complete it was almost medicinal. "That," Chelsea said, "was elegant. We are magnificent. He is shook. Look at his shoulders. Those are the shoulders of a man who has been shook. I'm going to be sick. You're going to be legendary." Genevieve was making a sound that might have been laughter if she'd been breathing. She was not breathing. She was doubled over with both hands over her mouth and her eyes streaming, and the head groom was looking at them both with the expression of a man who had just witnessed something he was going to pretend hadn't happened for the sake of everyone's employment. Florence walked back to the stables on legs that had stopped being reliable. She picked up her rasp. She went to stall 3. She started filing a hoof, because filing a hoof was something her hands knew how to do, and her hands needed to know how to do something right now, because the rest of her was a disaster. There was a wildflower on her workbench. She hadn't noticed it on the way in. A single stem of blue aster, the kind that grew in the upper palace gardens, behind the gates, in the beds that the stable staff walked past every day but never entered, because those gardens belonged to the king's private quarters. No note. No card. Just a stem of blue aster laid across her rasp. "Interesting," Chelsea said. Not smug for once. Warm. The particular warmth of a wolf who has just realized the game is larger than she thought. Very, very interesting. Chapter 2. The Campaign. The flowers kept coming. Day 2. Another blue aster. Day 3. A spray of white clover, which grew wild at the edge of the training grounds. Day 4. A small cluster of chamomile that smelled like the sun had been stored in it and released specifically onto her workbench. Each one appeared when she wasn't there. Each one was gone by the time anyone else arrived. No note, no witness, just flowers, accumulating in the jar she'd started keeping by the forge, because she couldn't bring herself to throw them away, and Chelsea would not shut up about it. "He's courting us," Chelsea said on day 7, when a sprig of lavender appeared tucked into the handle of her best hammer. "This is a courtship. We are being courted by the king with botanical precision." "He's leaving flowers. That's not a courtship, that's littering." "It's curated littering. Notice the progression? Asters first, blue, royal, formal, then clover, wild, accessible, grown at ground level. Then chamomile, domestic, warm, the kind of flower that grows near kitchens. He's descending. He's coming down from the palace gardens to the fields she walks through. The flowers are mapping the distance between his world and hers, and he's closing it one species at a time. You're reading a military campaign into wildflowers. I'm reading intent into wildflowers. There is intent here, Florence. Focused, deliberate, extremely well-researched intent. Someone has been studying what grows where. Florence filed a hoof and did not think about the fact that Chelsea was probably right. Week 2. He started coming to the stables. The first visit was legitimate, a cavalry review, officers in attendance, the king walking the line of war horses with the measured step of a man who took his mounted forces seriously. He stopped at stall 11, where Florence was fitting a corrective shoe on a mare with a cracked quarter. "The correction angle," he said. "What's the basis?" She looked up. He was standing at the stall door. Council clothes, dark tunic, iron clasp, the whole formal architecture. His face was composed. His hands were at his sides. His eyes were on the hoof. She explained the angle. She explained it well, because corrective shoeing was the thing she was best at in the world. And when she was talking about the thing she was best at in the world, her voice stopped shaking and her hands stopped being aware of themselves. And she was just a farrier, explaining the biomechanics of equine weight distribution to someone who was listening. He was listening. The same way he'd listened to Derek at the review, tracking, building, asking follow-up questions that showed he'd understood the previous answer. By the time she'd finished explaining why a 2-degree lateral correction on a quarter crack prevented the fracture from propagating through the wall thickness, he was leaning against the stall door with his arms crossed, and his head tilted at an angle that she was fairly sure was not in the standard repertoire of royal postures. "You should be running the farrier operation," he said. "I'm 23. "That's not an answer." "It's the answer everyone gives me when I suggest it." Something shifted in his expression. Not the managed face, the one underneath. For half a second, she saw a man who understood what it was like to be right about something, and too young for anyone to believe you. And then the half-second was over, and he was the king again. He turned to leave. Then, without looking back, in the dry, terse voice that she would later learn was his real one. "Incidentally, Miss Browning, is it standard practice in the farrier department to blow kisses at the sovereign during formal reviews, or was that a personal innovation?" Her face went hot so fast, she was surprised the horseshoe didn't sizzle. "It was a dare, I'm aware. Your friend's poker face needs work." He glanced back. His mouth shifted. Not a smile, not quite, but the sketch of one, delivered and withdrawn in the same second. "For the record, the sovereign found it acceptable." He left. Florence stood in the stall with the mare and the rasp and a face the color of a forge fire. And Chelsea said, "Acceptable. Acceptable. We have been rated acceptable by the crown. Frame that, put it on the wall. Please stop. Never, not ever, not once." But his eyes. In the moment before he turned, his steel-gray eyes had done a thing, a flicker, barely visible, like something behind them had pressed against the glass and been pulled back. His wolf, Chelsea said, very quietly. That was his wolf looking at you. He came back 4 days later, this time to discuss the shoeing schedule for the cavalry rotation, a reasonable administrative visit. Florence answered his questions about scheduling with the part of her brain that handled schedules, while the rest of her brain handled him, which was harder because he was standing close today, closer than last time. The stall was narrow and he was large, and the space between them had opinions about itself. He came back 3 days after that. Feed quality concerns. Did the farrier have input on nutritional impacts on hoof condition? She did, actually. She had strong opinions about the correlation between selenium deficiency and white line disease, and she told him about them in detail, and he listened in detail, and she was talking about selenium, and his eyes were on her mouth, and she lost her train of thought for the first time in her professional life. You were saying, he said, about the selenium. Right, yes, the bioavailability threshold is Florence. She stopped. He'd never used her first name. It had always been the junior farrier, or Miss Browning, and now it was Florence, said in his real voice, not the political one, the terse one, the one that had about 4 fewer layers of performance in it, and the sound of her own name in that voice did something to the base of her spine that she was not prepared to catalog. The selenium, he said. And there it was, the ghost of something at the corner of his mouth, not a smile, the structural foundation of a smile that had been approved for construction but not yet built. She finished the explanation. She had no idea what she said. When she stopped talking, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, very evenly, You know, you're much more composed when you're talking about horseshoes than when you're looking at me. I am not. I was perfectly composed. I was discussing bioavailability. You said threshold twice, and selenium 4 times in one sentence. I counted. You counted? I count things too, Miss Browning. His eyes held hers. The gray was warm. Apparently, we have that in common. He left. She stood in the stall gripping her rasp, and Chelsea was making a sound that could only be described as a wolf standing ovation. Week 3. Doors. He held doors. Not ostentatiously, he was simply there, at doors, when she was arriving. The library, where she borrowed books on metallurgy. The great hall, where staff ate. The corridor between the tack room and the forge, which was a corridor the king had no conceivable reason to be in unless he had developed a sudden interest in the structural integrity of hallway architecture. Each time, the same thing. A nod. Miss Browning. The door held. His scent, old wood and winter pine, and underneath it, something warm, like sunlit stone, filling the threshold for the 3 seconds it took her to pass through. The 4th time, at the library, she stopped in the doorway. Are you going to do this every day? Do what, Miss Browning? This, the doors, the appearing. I'm walking through my own castle. You happen to be walking through it at the same time. It would be rude not to hold the door. It would be normal not to hold the door. Kings don't hold doors. This king does. He paused. Consider it a reciprocal gesture. You offered me something at the Harvest Review. I'm returning the courtesy. Her face went pink. That's not, you can't keep bringing that up. I assure you I can. I intend to bring it up at every available opportunity for the foreseeable future. It's the most interesting thing that's happened at a Harvest Review in 9 years. She walked through the door very fast. Behind her she heard, or imagined she heard, what might have been a quiet sound of amusement from the king of 9 territories. He's haunting my doorways, she told Genevieve. He's holding your doors. That's different. Haunting is passive. This is active. This is a man who has looked at his schedule and thought, what time does the farrier go to the library? And then been there. That's worse. That's courtship. Everyone keeps using that word. Because everyone can see it except you. Genevieve was braiding her hair for bed, her fingers moving with the same precise economy she brought to everything. The flowers, the horse questions, the doors, the way he says your name. Florence, the king is conducting a 6-week strategic initiative aimed at your specific heart, and he is doing it with the patience and precision of a man who plans sieges for a living. She's right, Chelsea said. Your roommate is smarter than you. It hurts me to say this, but it's true. Neither of you is helping. We're both helping enormously. You're just too busy being terrified to notice. Week 4. The corridor. She was carrying a heavy saddle through the narrow passage between the tack room and the forge, the passage that was 5 feet wide and poorly lit and usually empty because sensible people took the longer route through the courtyard. She was not a sensible person. She was a person with a 40-pound saddle and no patience for extra steps. He was coming the other way. Miss Browning. Your Majesty. That's a large saddle. It's a standard saddle. And yet you chose the narrow corridor. And yet you also chose the narrow corridor. I'm the king. I can choose any corridor I like. Then choose a wider one. No, he said, simply. The word hung there. His mouth did the 2-millimeter thing. The passage was not wide enough for a woman with a saddle and a king with shoulders. One of them should have stepped back. Neither did. He turned sideways. His back went to the wall. He raised one hand to the beam above his head to give her space to pass. She had to slide between him and the opposite wall with the saddle between them like a leather barricade, and the space was approximately 18 inches, and she was in it, and he was right there, and his chest was right there, and old wood and winter pine and sunlit stone was everywhere, and the saddle bumped his hip as she passed, and his fingers brushed her forearm, and his eyes flashed gold, not a flicker. A ring. Pale amber gold, vivid, unmistakable, surfacing around the steel gray of his irises for exactly 1 second before sinking back. His hand on the beam tightened, his jaw set. The muscle at the hinge stood out under the skin. She stopped, 18 inches from his face, the saddle between them. Your eyes, she said. The light, he said. There was no light. The passage had no windows. They both knew this. She looked at him, and he looked at her, and the gold was gone, but the after effect was not. The very specific, very controlled stillness of a man whose wolf had just surfaced in public and who was holding himself together with architectural precision. And then her eyes did it back. She felt it, not a decision, not a choice. Just Chelsea pressing forward the way warmth presses through skin, and the hazel of her irises went bright green for 1 second. Vivid, unmistakable. She couldn't stop it. She didn't try. He saw it. His breathing changed. His hand on the beam shifted, and for 1 second she thought he was going to reach for her. His fingers opened, his weight moved forward, and then he stopped. Held. Let the second pass. The almost reach hung between them like a held breath. Austin, Chelsea whispered, not to Florence, to herself. The name arrived the way wolf knowledge sometimes did, not learned, just known. His wolf's name is Austin. Florence squeezed past. She walked away. She did not look back. Behind her, the king stood in the dark corridor with his hand on the beam and his eyes closed, and something in his chest rearranging itself around the specific, devastating scent of hay and iron and wildflower that she left in her wake like a signature. Her, Austin said. The word held in the dark like a flame. Her. Near Miss 3 happened during the rain. She was in the stable working on a bay mare's front shoes during a downpour, the kind of rain that came in sideways and turned the courtyard into a river and trapped everyone indoors for hours. The stable was warm and dry and smelled like hay and horse and the particular wood smoke that drifted in from the forge chimney. She was focused. Her hands knew this work. The rasp moved in clean strokes, and the mare stood patient, and the rain hammered the roof like applause. He came in wet. Not soaked. He'd been caught between buildings, moving fast, and the rain had gotten his shoulders and his hair and the collar of his tunic before he'd made it under the stable eaves. He stood in the doorway shaking water off his sleeves, and his dark hair was flattened to his skull, and he looked, for the first time since she'd known him, like a man who had been caught off guard by something and hadn't had time to build the face for it. He saw her. She saw him see her. The rain roared. "The bay," he said. "I was coming to check on the bay." "In the rain?" "I was in the area." The area was the far courtyard, nowhere near the stables. They both knew this. He came to the stall door. She kept working because stopping would mean looking at him, and looking at him would mean… She didn't know what it would mean. Something she wasn't ready for. Something that had been building for 4 weeks in flowers and doors and the way he said her name, and she could feel it gathering at the edges of every interaction, the weight of something unsaid pressing against the managed surface of every conversation they'd had. He watched her work, the rain on the roof, his breathing and the horse's breathing, and her hands on the hoof and the rasp moving in clean arcs. His scent filled the stall, old wood and winter pine and sunlit stone, cut with rain, sharper than usual, closer than usual, and underneath it the warm thing, the unnamed thing, the thing that made Chelsea go very still and very focused and say nothing at all, which was unprecedented. She could feel him the way you feel weather changing, not in any one sense but in all of them. The temperature of the air between them had shifted. His breathing had slowed, and the slower it got the more deliberate it became, as if he was rationing something. She glanced up once, quickly, and caught him not watching her hands, but watching the place where her braid had come loose, and a strand of auburn-brown hair had fallen across her neck. He was looking at that strand of hair with the focused stillness of something that was not entirely human, and his jaw was set, and his hands at his sides were carefully, deliberately open. She looked back at the hoof. Her own scent, hay and iron and wildflower, which she could never smell on herself but which Chelsea could track like a map, was mixing with his in the enclosed stall, and the mare's ears were swiveling between them like an animal that could feel the electricity in the room and was trying to figure out if it was thunder or something else. "You're good at this," he said. "I know." That wasn't a question. "I know that too." He almost smiled. She saw it. The architecture of it. The way his mouth changed shape by approximately 2 millimeters, and his eyes changed temperature by approximately 10 degrees. And then it was gone, and he was the king. And the king was watching a farrier work, and this was normal, and this was fine. And the rain was loud enough to cover the sound of both their hearts doing things they were not discussing. She set the hoof down and straightened to switch tools, and the strand of hair fell further, catching on her collar, and he reached for it. Not a decision, an arrival. His hand came up the way his hand had caught the blown kiss. Without permission, without plan. And his fingers were an inch from her neck when he stopped. She felt the warmth of his hand hovering at the side of her throat, not touching. The heat of his skin close enough that the fine hairs on her neck rose, and she went very still. Not human still, wolf still. Her chin dropped a fraction and her head tilted, bearing the line of her throat to his hovering hand. And it was involuntary and ancient, and she couldn't stop it, any more than he could stop the gold that flared in his eyes. He saw the tilt, the bearing. He knew what it meant. His hand closed into a fist. He pulled it back. He put it behind his back and held it there with the other hand, like a man physically restraining himself from something his whole body wanted to do. "The strand," he said. His voice was rougher than she'd heard it. "Your hair was…" "I know. I was going to. I know." The rain hammered the roof. Neither of them moved. The mare huffed. "You could just talk to him," Chelsea said eventually, gentle in a way that Chelsea almost never was. "Tell him about the flowers. Tell him about the doors. Tell him about the sound his name makes in your head at 3 in the morning when you're lying in the dark counting things because you can't sleep. Stop. I'm your wolf. I don't stop. I just wait. Chapter 3. The Crack. She went to find him on a Tuesday. She had decided, somewhere between the corridor and the rain and the fourth consecutive night of lying awake counting the hours between his visits, that this had to stop. Not because she wanted it to. She did not want it to. She wanted the opposite of it stopping. She wanted it to accelerate until it reached whatever conclusion it was hurtling toward, but because wanting it was the problem. She was a farrier. He was the king. The gap between those two words was not a gap. It was a continent. She found him in his study. She'd been there once before, summoned for a consultation on a horse's leg that had turned out to be an extremely minor issue, requiring approximately 90 seconds of professional assessment and 45 minutes of questions about metallurgical alloys that she was now fairly certain had nothing to do with the horse. The study was warm. Books on 3 walls, fire in the hearth, a desk covered in correspondence and maps, and a water glass and, she noticed, with a feeling like stepping into cold water, a dried spray of chamomile in a glass jar at the corner of the desk. The same chamomile she'd found on her workbench in week 1. He'd kept them. He had kept her flowers. She had kept his flowers and he had kept the same flowers. And neither of them had said anything about it. And the jar was sitting on his desk between a treaty document and a military dispatch like it belonged there. Noted, Chelsea said. Filed. Extremely noted. You need to stop, Florence said. He looked up, pen in hand, the managed face, composed, measured, the one that ran a kingdom. Stop what, Miss Browning? The flowers, the doors, the horse questions. The horse questions were legitimate. Your analysis of selenium bioavailability has been. Your Majesty. He stopped. People are talking. The council is, people notice things. And I'm a stable hand. She gestured at the entirety of him, the study, the crown seal, the kingdom visible through the window behind him. All of this. And I can't have this and then not have it. I can't walk through a door you're holding and pretend it's architecture. I can't find flowers on my workbench and pretend they're from the wind. I need you to stop, because if you don't stop, then I'm going to have to believe this is real. And if I believe it's real and it isn't, then I don't. She stopped herself. She'd said too much. More than she'd planned. The words had come out the way horseshoe nails come out of a bucket. Faster than intended, clattering, impossible to put back. He put the pen down. He stood up. He didn't come around the desk. He stayed behind it, which she understood later was deliberate, was him putting furniture between himself and the impulse to close the distance, which was an act of restraint that cost him something she couldn't see. The blown kiss, he said. His voice had shifted. Not the political register, the real one. Terse, quiet, stripped of performance. At the Harvest Review. It was a dare. My roommate dared me. I'm sorry, I never should have. I know it was a dare. She blinked. I watched you arguing with the woman next to you for 30 seconds before you did it. I saw the moment you decided. Your jaw set and your left hand closed, and then you did it like you were jumping off something and hadn't checked how far down the ground was. He paused. His jaw did the thing, the clench at the hinge. I caught it because it was the first honest thing anyone had offered me in 11 months. The room was very quiet. The fire popped. The chamomile sat in its jar on the desk between them. 11 months, she said. I have been king since I was 22. I have had 6 years of formal dinners and council sessions and diplomatic exchanges and marriage proposals and trade negotiations, and every single one of them has been a performance. Everyone I speak to wants something. Everyone I meet has calculated the angle before they open their mouth. His voice was steady and terrible. And then a farrier in a line of stable hands, standing in the sun with forge burns on her fingers, blew a kiss at me because her friend dared her to. And it was the most honest thing that had happened to me in a year. I didn't plan any of this. I caught it because I couldn't not. Tell her the rest, Austen said. Tell her about the 3 a.m. part. Tell her about the flowers. Tell her about why old wood and winter pine smells like home now, and it didn't before. Tell her, tell her, tell. The crack widened. Something in his eyes shifted. Not gold, not wolf. Just Elric, looking at her from behind a face built to hold rooms and councils and kingdoms. And for 1 second, the face wasn't holding anything except the specific, unbearable fact of her standing in his study, telling him to stop. Then the study door opened. An advisor stepped in. Your Majesty, the Thornfeld delegation requires… The mask clicked back. Instant, seamless, like a drawbridge slamming shut. Miss Browning, thank you for the consultation. He nodded. Professional. Managed. The eyes that had been open a second ago were now the eyes that ran kingdoms. I'll have the farrier schedule updated per your recommendations. She left. She walked through 2 corridors and a courtyard in the autumn sun, and she sat down on a bench by the water trough, and she put her face in her hands, and she breathed. Her hands smelled like iron and hoof, and the faintest ghost of chamomile from the jar on his desk. And she thought about 11 months, and she thought about the word honest. And Chelsea lay alongside her consciousness with the particular weighted silence of a wolf who has stopped being smug and started being afraid. She heard about Thornfeld from Genevieve. Lord Thornfeld had proposed a marriage alliance. His daughter, Emmeline, to the king. The council was pushing hard. Thornfeld's territory controlled the iron mines and the northern border pass. An alliance brought resources and security, and the kind of political stability that a young king without a mate needed to consolidate his position. It was practical. It was strategic. It was the smart play. They say the council's been pressuring him for months, Genevieve said, pulling off her boots. He's been stalling. Nobody knows why. We know why, Chelsea said. Flat. No warmth. The pragmatic layer of Chelsea that Florence sometimes forgot existed, the part that was wolf before it was anything else, the part that understood territory and cost, and what happened when you stood between a king and his kingdom. This is bad, Florence said. This is complicated, Genevieve corrected. Bad is falling off a horse. Complicated is having the king of 9 territories in love with you, while his council is trying to marry him to an iron heiress. He's not in love with me. Genevieve looked at her with an expression that could have leveled a mountain. Genevieve. He kept your chamomile, Florence. He's keeping dried flowers on his desk between a treaty and a military dispatch. That is a man who is so far past interested that he's in a different postal district. And you are going to have to decide what you're going to do about it before the council decides for both of you. Florence lay in bed that night and stared at the ceiling and counted. She counted the flowers. 14, over 4 weeks. She counted the doors. 9. She counted the visits to the stable. 7. She counted the near misses, the moments where the distance between them had compressed to something breathable. And then she counted the cost. To him, to his position, to the alliance his kingdom needed. Of a king who held doors for a farrier and kept dried chamomile on his desk. The cost was real. The cost was iron and border security, and 6 years of political credibility spent on a woman who shoed horses. She made a decision. It was not a passive decision. It was calculated with the same precision she brought to corrective shoeing, measuring the angle, calculating the load, filing away the excess until only the necessary shape remained. She wrote a transfer request. Southern Outpost. Their farrier had retired last season. She wrote it in her cleanest handwriting on proper paper, and she sealed it, and she didn't cry while writing it, because Florence Browning did not cry over decisions she'd made on purpose. Don't, Chelsea said. This is the right thing. This is the tidy thing, The right thing is walking into his study and telling him you're in love with him and letting the kingdom figure itself out. That's not how kingdoms work. That's exactly how kingdoms work. Every kingdom that ever lasted was built by someone who chose a person over a calculation. She sealed the letter. Chelsea went quiet in the way that wasn't quiet. The way that was a wolf lying down with her chin on her paws, watching the door, waiting. She brought the transfer request to his study the next morning. He read it. His face was stone. The chamomile jar was still on his desk. The fire was burning. The morning light came through the window and landed on the parchment in his hands, and on his knuckles, which were white. "Why?" he said. "Because Thornfeld's daughter brings you iron, and I bring you horseshoes. And you need iron more than horseshoes right now. You don't get to make that calculation." "I just did." He looked at her, long. His jaw was locked, not set, locked. The distinction she hadn't understood until now, but understood completely in this moment. Set was composure. Locked was control holding something down that wanted to come up. "If I sign this," he said, "you leave in 3 days." "I know." "And the flowers stop." She flinched. Small. Involuntary. The flinch of a woman who had braced for everything except having the flowers named out loud. He saw it. He saw everything about her. He had been seeing everything about her for 6 weeks. He signed the document. He signed it because she asked him to, because she was standing in his study making a sacrifice she didn't owe, for a kingdom she served but didn't rule, and she was doing it with her chin up and her hands steady, and the scent of hay and iron and wildflower and something like grief was coming off her in waves. And Austin was saying, "No," in a voice that didn't sound like a word anymore. It sounded like a door being closed from the inside. She took the signed document. She turned. She walked to the door. "Florence." She stopped. He'd said her name, her first name, the way he'd said it in the stable, like a place he was memorizing the route to. She didn't turn around. If she turned around, she would see his face, and if she saw his face, she would not leave. And she had to leave because the mathematics of a kingdom were more important than the mathematics of her heart, even when her heart had better numbers. "The blown kiss was real," he said. "Whatever else it was, whatever dare, whatever game, the part where I caught it was real." She left. She did not look back. "You're wrong about this," Chelsea said. Not angry, grieving. The quiet, specific grief of a wolf watching the thing it wants walk away from it on purpose. "You are so wrong about this." "I know," Florence said. "I know." Chapter 4. The Stable. 2 days passed. The flowers stopped. That was the thing that broke her. Not the signed document, not the packed bag, not Genevieve's silence, which was worse than Genevieve's commentary, because Genevieve's silence meant she was too angry to be helpful. It was the absence of flowers. The workbench was bare. The space where the asters and the chamomile and the lavender had appeared every morning for 4 weeks was just wood, just surface, just a bench where she worked. She'd known it would happen. She'd asked for it to happen. She'd filed the transfer request specifically so it would happen. But knowing and feeling were 2 different systems, and only one of them responded to logic, and the other one responded to the empty space on a workbench where a man had been laying his heart down 1 stem at a time. The doors stopped too. He was not at the library. He was not at the Great Hall. He was not in the corridor. The space he had been filling so carefully for 6 weeks was now just space, and she moved through it like a woman walking through rooms from which all the furniture had been removed. "Miss Browning," the staff said when she passed. Not Florence, Miss Browning. The name she had been before, the name she would be after, the name without the specific, devastating way he said it that had made it sound like a place he was memorizing the route to. She packed. Her tools went into the leather case, the rasp first, then the nippers, then the clinch block, each one wrapped in oilcloth the way she'd been taught, the way her hands had been doing since she was 17. She stacked the metallurgy books by the door. She folded her spare work shirts. She moved through the room the way she moved through a shoeing, methodical, precise, each step following the last with the muscle memory of someone who had done hard things before and knew the trick was not to stop moving. The jar of dried flowers she stood in front of for a long time. She held it, turned it, looked at the blue asters pressed flat against the glass, and the chamomile faded to pale gold, and the lavender still holding its scent after weeks. 14 flowers. She'd counted them. She'd counted them the way she counted everything, not because the number mattered, but because counting was the thing she did when feeling was too large to hold in any other shape. You could just unpack, Genevieve said from her bed. You could just unpack and walk to his study and say, "I was wrong, I'm staying, I'm in love with you, please hold my doors forever." I can't. You won't. It's the same thing. It is the exact opposite thing, and you know it, and I know it, and your wolf knows it, and his wolf knows it, and the entire stable staff knows it, and I'm fairly certain his horse knows it. The bay mare has been off her feed since you filed the transfer. Even the horse is upset. The horse is a perceptive animal, Chelsea said. The horse understands things. Be more like the horse. The council session was at 10. She knew this because the entire palace knew this. The Thornfeld delegation had been in residence for a week, the alliance terms were being finalized, and the king was expected to accept the marriage proposal as part of the broader trade agreement. It was the practical choice. The strategic choice. The choice a good king would make. She was in the stable packing the last of her forge tools when Genevieve ran in. He refused. Florence looked up. What? The king, he refused the alliance marriage. In front of the entire council and the Thornfeld delegation. He said. Genevieve was breathing hard, her face flushed with the specific excitement of a woman who had just sprinted from the great hall to the stables in under 3 minutes. He said bodies are not negotiable. That the crown doesn't transact in persons. He offered a commercial iron deal and a garrison expansion instead. He refused Thornfeld? He refused the marriage. He kept the trade terms. He restructured the entire alliance on the spot. The council is losing their minds. Thornfeld's people are furious, and the king just sat there with his hands open on the table and let them shout. Hands open, Chelsea repeated. Very still. The way a wolf gets still when something important is happening. Not fists, open. Why are you telling me this? Florence asked, even though she knew, even though her hands had stopped packing and her heart had started doing arithmetic. Because he's coming here, Genevieve said. I saw him leave the council chamber. He's walking this way, in his council clothes. Right now. Put the tools down, Chelsea said. Not smug, not strategic, not any of the registers Chelsea used when she was performing. Just urgent, just certain, just a wolf who could feel something shifting in the territory. He is coming to you. He just burned a political alliance in front of 30 people and he is coming to you. Put the tools down and breathe. She didn't put the tools down. She was holding a hoof file and she kept holding it because her hands needed something to hold and a hoof file was what was available. He walked in. He was still in his formal council clothes, the dark tunic, the iron clasp, the boots that cost more than her annual wages. He walked past the stable hands who stopped what they were doing. He walked past the grooms who stared. He walked past Genevieve, who stepped back into the tack room with the discretion of a woman who understood when to witness and when to disappear. He walked to Florence's workbench. Her pack was by the door. Her tools were half-cased. The jar of dried flowers was on the bench beside the hoof file. He looked at the jar. Something crossed his face, recognition, pain, the specific ache of seeing something you gave someone and watching them pack it to take with them because they couldn't leave it behind and couldn't stay. The bay mare, he said, stall 6. She's been favoring her left 4. Florence stared at him. You just came from council. The mare's shoe needs checking. You're in your council clothes. The mare doesn't care about my clothes. She looked at him. He looked at her. The stable was quiet except for the horses shifting in their stalls and the rain starting up again outside, soft and steady. Go, Chelsea whispered. She went to stall 6. The bay mare was there, patient but standing wrong. Weight shifted off the left fore, head low, the posture of a horse that had been hurting for a while. Florence frowned. This wasn't a simple shoeing adjustment. The previous farrier had fitted a standard correction, but the angle was wrong. She could see it from the doorway. She knelt, lifted the hoof, ran her thumb along the sole, tested the frog, felt the heat differential along the lateral wall. Her hands moved with a precision that had nothing to do with the king standing 4 feet away, and everything to do with the fact that a horse was in pain, and she could fix it. How long has she been like this? 3 weeks. The senior farrier adjusted the shoe twice. It hasn't helped. Because it's not the shoe. It's the angle. She set the hoof down gently. She has early navicular compression. The correction your farrier applied is loading the heel when it should be unloading it. He's been making it worse. She looked up at him. I need to pull this shoe, reshape the medial branch, drop the angle by 4 degrees, and fit a rolled toe. It'll take 20 minutes and she'll be sound by the end of the week. You can see that from holding her foot, yes. It's what I do. She got her tools. He held the mare's halter. Not because he had to, but because holding it put him at the horse's head while she was at the hoof, and the horse was between them and the work was between them. She pulled the shoe, heated the new one at the portable forge by stall 4, shaped it with the hammer, the ring of iron on iron filling the stable. He watched her work the way he'd watched her work for 6 weeks, with total attention. Except now the attention had nowhere to hide. She fitted the corrective shoe, set the hoof down. The mare shifted her weight, tested it, and for the first time in 3 weeks put full weight on her left fore. The head came up, the ears went forward. Sound, Florence said. She'll need a follow-up in 10 days, but the compression will resolve. He was quiet for a moment. The senior farrier has been treating her for 3 weeks. The senior farrier doesn't specialize in navicular correction. I do. He looked at her. She looked at him. The mare was standing square for the first time in a month, and the rain was tapping the roof, and the woman who had fixed what no one else could was holding a hammer and a rasp, and had hay in her hair and forge soot on her wrists, and the king of 9 territories was standing in his council clothes, holding a halter he didn't need to hold. She worked. He held. The rain tapped the roof. You refused the alliance, she said, not looking up. I refused the terms. You refused them because of me. I refused them because using people as trade goods is wrong. That was true before I met you. He paused. The pause had weight. But I would be lying if I said the principle felt abstract anymore. She filed the shoe. Precise, clean strokes. Her hands were steady because her hands had always been steady with a rasp, even when the rest of her was shaking. For the record, he said, and his voice was quiet, but there was something in it, something light under the weight. A thread of the man who counted her seleniums and rated her blown kiss acceptable. I held every door in this castle for 6 weeks. I learned the word navicular. I have opinions about selenium bioavailability that I cannot discuss with anyone else in the kingdom. If you leave, I will be a man who knows an enormous amount about corrective horseshoeing and has absolutely no one to talk to about it. She made a sound that was almost a laugh. Almost. It was the sound of something cracking that needed to crack. You signed my transfer, she said. You asked me to. And if I asked you to unsign it? Then I would unsign it, tonight, right now, standing in this stall in my council clothes, holding your horse's halter. He's not my horse. He could be. Everything here could be. That was never the issue. She set the hoof down. She stood up. The mare nickered softly and shifted, and Florence was standing 4 feet from the king of 9 territories, in a horse stall in the rain, holding a hoof file, and his face was not managed. The mask was off. He was looking at her with the gray-gold eyes, gold surfacing. Austin right there, not hidden, not performed, just present. And he was not governing. He was not performing. He was just a man standing in front of a woman he had been catching things from for 6 weeks. And he was holding still, and he was letting her choose. Her, Austin said. Not a word anymore. A heartbeat. Please. She put the hoof file on the ledge. She stepped forward. She put her hand on his jaw, the left side, where the muscle had been locked for 6 weeks, where composure lived. And she felt it unclench under her fingers. Not all at once, in stages, like a fist uncurling 1 finger at a time. Like the architecture letting go of something it had been holding since before she blew a kiss at the Harvest Review. His eyes closed. His breathing changed. She kissed him. She kissed him with hay in her hair and iron on her hands, and the whole stable watching through stall doors and gaps in partitions. And he dropped the halter, and his hands came up, one to the small of her back, one to her jaw, cradling her face the way she was cradling his. And the mare nosed at his shoulder because he'd stopped paying attention, and neither of them cared. The kiss was not gentle. It was the kiss of a woman who had been counting the distance between them for 6 weeks and had run out of numbers. It was the kiss of a man who had been holding still for so long that the first motion felt like falling. She tasted winter pine and sunlit stone, and the clean, sharp edge of something that had been waiting, patiently, precisely, for exactly this. When she pulled back, his eyes were open, full gold. Not a flicker, not a ring. Full, vivid, unhidden. Austin at the surface, with nothing held back. His thumb traced the line of her jaw, and he looked at her, and stopped. Her eyes were bright green, full, vivid Chelsea green, the hazel gone, the wolf right at the surface the way his was. A low sound came from her chest. Not a growl, not quite. Something between a purr and a claim, and she didn't try to stop it. Her scent had shifted, the hay and iron still there, but the wildflower underneath blown wide open, warm and sharp, filling the stall like something that had been waiting to be said. He saw all of it, the eyes, the sound, the scent. He looked at her the way he'd looked at the blown kiss, like she was the most honest thing in the room, and he was going to hold it this time and never let go. Your transfer, he said. His voice was wrecked, quiet and wrecked and real. Rescind it. Done. And the flowers? His mouth did the thing, the almost smile. The 2-millimeter shift that was worth more than anyone else's full grin. The flowers never stopped, he said. I have 3 days' worth in a bucket in my study. I didn't know where to put them. She laughed, a real laugh, sudden, helpless, the kind that starts in the belly and doesn't ask permission. His eyes widened slightly at the sound, like a man seeing sunlight hit a room he'd thought was permanently dark. Magnificent, Chelsea said. We are magnificent. I told you. I told you from the beginning. This was always the plan. The blown kiss was phase 1. It was a dare, Chelsea. It was destiny disguised as a dare. I will accept credit now. The rain fell on the stable roof. The mare nudged Elric's shoulder again, offended by the lack of attention. Florence's hand was still on his jaw, and his hand was still on her face, and neither of them moved, because moving would mean returning to the world where he was a king, and she was a farrier. And right now, they were just two people standing in a horse stall, with their hands on each other's faces and the rain coming down. And the world could wait. Chapter 5. The Last Dare. 3 weeks later, she woke in a room that was not the stable quarters. His room. The sheets smelled like old wood and winter pine. Morning light came through tall windows and fell across the desk. His desk, which now had her metallurgy books stacked alongside his correspondence, and the jar of dried flowers sitting between a farrier's manual and a council agenda, and a second jar of fresh wildflowers that he replenished every morning before she woke, because he thought she didn't notice. She noticed. She always noticed. She counted them. He was beside her, awake, propped on one elbow, watching her with the gray gold eyes. Austin's gold, steady at the edges now, not surfacing and retreating, but just there, like something that had stopped hiding. His face was the real one, the one without architecture, the one he wore when no one was watching except her, which was happening more often now because he had started letting the managed face go earlier and earlier in the day, like a man gradually forgetting how to perform. "Your roommate," he said. "What about her?" "She has submitted a formal proposal to the household steward requesting promotion to royal stablemaster. 12 pages, including a section on equine nutrition that I am told by 3 separate advisors is genuinely impressive." Florence closed her eyes. She didn't. She included a footnote. The footnote reads, and I am quoting directly, "I would like it noted for the official record that the blown kiss that precipitated the king's courtship was my idea. I accept full credit, and I expect to be acknowledged at all future state dinners." I'm going to kill her. "I've approved the promotion. She starts Monday. She will be managing the same team you work on." She's going to be my supervisor?" "She's going to be your supervisor." "This is revenge. This is your revenge for the transfer request." He almost smiled. Almost. The 2-millimeter thing, the shift that she now understood was not a failure to smile, but a choice to keep something precious small, like holding a flame between cupped hands so the wind couldn't take it. "It is," he said, "an extremely well-researched promotion based entirely on merit. The footnote had no bearing on my decision." "The footnote had complete bearing on your decision." "I have no comment on the footnote at this time." "I like Genevieve," Chelsea said, from somewhere warm and settled and uncharacteristically peaceful. "Genevieve has strategic vision. Genevieve sees the board." The marking happened in his study. Evening. The fire was burning and the desk was covered in her books and his papers and the 2 jars of flowers, one dried, one fresh, sat side by side like before and after, like proof that something could be kept and also renewed at the same time. He asked, not with a decree or a document or a formal proposal run through appropriate channels, just, "May I?" She tilted her head, bared her throat. The specific, enormous, unguarded trust of a woman offering the most vulnerable part of herself to a wolf. And the trust was the point. The trust was what made it different from every other gesture. Because trust like this couldn't be requested or earned or strategized or legislated. It could only be given by someone who had decided, with full knowledge and open eyes, that the person in front of them would not use it wrong. He marked her, his mouth at the curve of her shoulder, his hand steady, the bite precise and gentle and final. The bond completing, not with a surge, not with fireworks, but with a settling, the way a key turns in a lock that was built for exactly that key and no other. The way a horse's weight shifts when it finally trusts the hand on its halter. Something clicking into place that had always been shaped to click there and was just waiting for the right pressure. Home, Austin said. The word he'd been saying since the corridor, since the blown kiss, since the first moment he saw her hands on a horseshoe and understood that everything up to this point had been preamble. Home. Finally, Chelsea agreed. Not smug, not strategic, just warm, the way a wolf gets warm when the territory is established and the borders are drawn and the person who matters is exactly where they should be. She marked him back. Because Florence Browning did not accept anything she could not return, and the alpha king of the 9 territories was sitting in his study with a bite mark on his shoulder and the expression of a man who had been completely, irreversibly, and deliberately won. Genevieve is going to be insufferable about this, Florence said. She already is. She's going to say the blown kiss was fate. It was a dare. It was a dare, she paused. Best dare I ever lost. He took her hand, turned it over, pressed his mouth to her palm, the exact place where the blown kiss had started, 6 weeks ago, in a line of stable hands during the harvest review. Best dare I ever caught, he said. She laced her fingers through his and held on, and the fire burned, and the flowers stood in their jars, and the evening settled around them like something that had been waiting patiently for a very long time to arrive. Hold the dare, but hold the person who made it.